This is our second project, and most people, when they see at first, they will say, okay, this seems very straightforward and simple, but there is this element of surprise when they get down and try working out the conditions for it to work as intended, because it's a little confusing and you have to like stop for a second and think, because the most logical, like at first, way to solve it is not exactly working out. So basically, I'm gonna show you what we're supposed to do, and this is our final project. So this is what it's gonna look like. There's only one element, hence like kind of confusing. It's supposed to be simple, why it isn't. So on this scroll event, we're gonna grow the element. As soon as it reaches half the size of the browser window, it's gonna kind of like, it's not gonna stop, it's gonna go back and get smaller. And it's gonna get smaller, smaller, smaller until it disappears completely. I'm trying to kind of like capture the moment when it disappears, and there we go. So the square stops existing for a second, but on the scroll it's gonna grow again, and this is happening. And it doesn't matter whether you scroll up or down, it's supposed to just go back and forth, back and forth. Cool. So this project that we are going to do together, and there is another one just for you, working kind of on the similar idea of creating those conditions, working with flags, but slightly different. So I advise you that you follow and you try to work out these conditions with me or even ahead of me, so that you truly understand how you create those and the logic behind it. Cool. So as you can see, main.js and index.html, clean. We're going to start from 0. I'm going to use emmet, an exclamation mark, and enter. And this is our document HTML already. I'm just going to go live. There we go. I'm going to close this tab because we don't need it. The first tab is the final completed project, and the second tab is the document that we're currently working with or working on. Cool. So ultimately, we do not want to place our div element inside the body with the help of tags, but we will now, because I want to style it in here and I want to see what it looks like straight away. So I'm gonna place a style tag, and inside the style tag, referring to the div, and what we need to set the width 100 pixels. We want to do the same for height, 100 pixels, so it's square. To make it visible, let's give it a background color, and feel free to pick any color that you like. I'm going with a classy black. Cool. We can see our beautiful div already placed there. We don't want it to move as we scroll. We want it to be like sticking to the window, to the web page, and not move. So let's set the position to fixed, and let's put it in the center. So top 50%, left also 50%. Save it. You can see that it's not quite in the middle, so let's do transform and translate. Inside the parentheses, we are saying how much we want to move it. So minus 50% and another minus 50%. And this should solve our problem with centering. Cool. This is exactly in the middle. So this is all we need for our div. And another thing that we need is to add, like, kind of force the scroll onto the web page, because at the moment it doesn't have enough content for the scroll to appear. we're gonna set body height. Normally it's 100 viewport height, which is 100%, and we need to make sure that it's much bigger. So we're gonna give it 10,000 viewport height, 10,000% of the browser window size. Save it, and let's see if there's scroll now. You can see a nice, beautiful, long scroll appeared. Cool. And this is it. I'm removing this div element from here. So on the save, it's gonna disappear, and I'm just gonna add, I'm gonna add a script tag. I have a very short source path because it is placed in the same folder. So it's just main.js, save it. This is all we're gonna need in our index.html. Let's go to the main.js. Let's check if it's been attached correctly. Hello. Let's inspect. Let's expand it a little bit, and instead of the element, let's show the console. There's a hello on line 1, so everything has been attached properly. And now, what do we need? First things first, we removed our div from the index.html, so we need to make sure that we create it in here. And that is JS to handle our problem. So I'm gonna create a const called square, and by document, create element method. I'm gonna create our new element. Specify that we want to create a div, and it's been created now, but it still didn't say where we want it. And we want it in the body by append child method. Again, in the parentheses, we say what we want to add, and we want to add the element that we just created. So we're gonna paste it here, and it should appear again. Cool. We want to be able to modify the width and height of the element. So as the next thing, I'm gonna remove those from here because these are not going to be fixed. They will be modified and they will change as we go. So we don't need them to be here, hard coded. So how do we style elements with help of JS? We specify what element we want to work on, which is square. We want to get inside the style object. And in that style object, we have everything that we could change, but we want to set width to 100 pixels, and we want to do exact same thing with the height because it's a square. So both properties set to the same value, 100 pixels. Save it, and square style with 100 pixels. Why can't we see? Oh, because I was supposed to change it to height and I left width twice. And now it should appear again. We could do same thing for any other property. Let's say background color, we want red, and it's changed to red now. If we go to elements, we will see that there's a new style attribute introduced as an inline style. So it's going to override all other styles that we specified either in index.html or in the separate file. Cool. So we can see those elements being added. Background color red. Just pay attention to the camel case here instead of hyphens that are normally in the CSS rules. And I'm going to repeat that a lot, hoping that it's going to be so ingrained in your memory that even like in the middle of the night, you'll still remember that, okay, in JS, if I want to introduce an inline style, I'm using a camel case instead. Cool. I don't want my square to be red. I decided I wanted my square to be black, and I'm standing by my choice. Cool. While we're here on the console, I'm going to show you a property of the window, one of many available to us, but this one in particular is going to be interesting because of what we need for our div. We need our div to grow only to the half size of the browser window, and here we can access the inner height of the window, which is currently set to 187. And if I'm gonna make it much smaller and access it again, we can see that it's changed to 59. And this is exactly the same thing for inner width property, currently 246. And I'm gonna expand it, and it's now 316. You can see we can access the inner width and inner height of the window at any time, and this is very useful because we cannot hard code the size of the browser for the user. Whoever gonna access our application or our web page and wants to do it, it has to be accurate for any size that is currently the size of their browser. Cool. And I'm just gonna make this mini note here that if we want to reach half the size of the window browser, so this is gonna be the maximum size of our square, max size of square, and this goes like this: window inner width. This is what we're gonna work with, and you could either multiply by half or divide by 2, and it's always gonna give us half the size, and it's gonna be important for our conditions later on. Cool. I'm thinking the next step would be to set the listening on that scroll event. So the scroll occurs on the entire window, so we're gonna set window at event listener as the first parameter. We could do anything, but we want to listen for a scroll, so we're gonna pick scroll from the list provided by Visual Studio Code, so it's always helping. If we ever get lost or confused, Visual Studio Code is already like kind of indicating what would be the next step. The second parameter is a function. I'm gonna use a anonymous function, and this function is gonna be responsible for our entire program. Cool. Since we want to modify the size of our square, it would be good to not to have it hard-coded like this, but to actually have it in a separate variable. So I'm gonna remove it for now. I know it's throwing errors and it's highlighted, underlined with red, but bear with me. Got let size, which is gonna be the size of our square, and I'm gonna set it 10 because I think 100 is slightly too big. Why am I working on the number here instead of the string? Because numbers are something that are easy to increase and decrease, increment and decrement, and strings are not. Strings do not hold the same behaviors. So we're gonna stick to a number here, and we're gonna place the size here and the size here. But currently the size is holding only the value of 10, so we need to make sure that we introduce the unit of measure, and we measure the height and width in pixels. So we're gonna concatenate our size with also pixels. And what is happening underneath, because we are concatenating a number and a string, from the previous classes. If you do not remember, if you try add a number to a string as we are trying currently to do, this is going to be converted to a string as well. So 10 is going to become a 10 as a string and concatenated together. So something like this is going to be created underneath. So the CSS is going to receive exactly what it is expecting. And well, we have to do it this way. Cool. So the first step to achieving our goal, which would be, I'm going to save it, to increase the size of the square, would be to actually increase the size. Since we have it stored in here, we're going to work on those here. And the first natural reaction for anyone at the beginning, like maybe not for everyone, but most people, would be okay, I want to increase the size. So let's add, I don't know, 10 to it. And let's hit save. Unfortunately, it only happens once. And we want the process to continue throughout as we scroll. So this is not a very productive or very efficient way to increase the size. Instead, we have to use our variable that we created for that very purpose and increase it. This is incrementing by 1. We could do by 5, 10, 100, just by like size plus 5, which would be long for plus equal. And every time now I'm gonna scroll, it's gonna grow, but this is gonna grow indefinitely. And we don't want it to grow indefinitely. We want it to stop. Before we do that, I'm gonna copy this as well, so that it's not gonna grow only to the sides, but it's gonna grow as a square in all directions. As you can see, it doesn't stop. It's gonna take the entire space of the window, and we need to prevent that from happening. What's the best way to prevent anything from happening is to place conditions. Conditions usually start with an if statement. So if something is true, then do something else. We want to grow our square as long as it's gonna reach half the size of the window browser. So as long as size is smaller or equal to, and now we're gonna use this half the size of the window browser. So as long as the size of the square is smaller or equal to half the size of the browser window, we want it to grow. I'm just gonna paste it inside the curly braces, because this is what is supposed to happen if the condition is true. Cool, and now let's check if we actually got it right. So it's growing, and then it stops as soon as it reaches half the size of the window. So this condition is very much true. And this was the first step in creating our application. And at this point, majority of people dealing with this task are a little confused. Because if the size of the square is supposed to grow as long as it reaches the half of the size of the window, then let's just do the opposite. When it is bigger than the window, than the half the size of the window, make it smaller. So we're just gonna copy this if statement and place it here. And we're just gonna turn it around. So instead of making it smaller, we're gonna make the size bigger. Gonna save it, and instead of growing, we're gonna decrement. I'm growing, but I'm not getting any smaller. Maybe this could help. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Cool. This condition is actually met, but as soon as it's met and it's decreased, then it's gonna increase again, because then this condition is gonna be true. Do you see why? Our square is growing, reaching half the size of the window browser, and as soon as it reaches the half the size, it's gonna reach the other condition. So both conditions are true for a fraction of a second, but well, you just have to figure out it in your head, because this is for every individual to kind of understand it. And I'm gonna stick to incrementing by 1 and decrementing by 1, because I think it looks nicer, and I don't mind that it's growing slightly in a slower pace. So basically this condition is not going to work, and we have to create another set of conditions, and this is when the flag is going to become very, very useful. Flag is a tool for like switching the value. It only takes 2 values, so it's either true or false. I'm going to create it here. So let, because it's going to change and it cannot hold just one value, so I cannot use const here. So I'm going to do a let, and the convention is that to name your boolean value, you kind of make it the name has to be a question that can be answered only with either yes or no. So is growing? Yes. Is growing? No. So for currently, I'm going to set it to true and save it. And these will happen if is growing is true. Oh, and also we wouldn't do 2 if statements, but if it's like a continuation of the same thought, we do else if, and if this is not true, then if this is true, do this. So this is how you kind of like create the structure for the if statement. And also, since we already declared the condition, if we already declared the condition for when this is supposed to happen, and there's only one other option, then we can get rid of the if and get rid of the condition altogether. Cool. So this is covering one option, and this is covering all other options. So if it's growing is set to true, then this is supposed to happen. And in any other circumstances, whatever it is, make sure this happens, whatever is in between the curly braces. Cool. So this, I hope, is clear. And now we have to create the conditions for when to switch the flag. And those conditions for switching the flag are like taking the both extremes. So basically, we're going to create another if statement, because it's a separate if statement. So this is one thought, kind of one thought, one process, and this is a separate thought process. So if, again, here we are working on the actual conditions. So if the size is bigger or equal to, again, window inner height, inner width divided by 2, if the size, let's just think what really is happening underneath. If the size of the square is bigger or equal, so it reaches the half the size of the browser window, then I want my flag to turn. So it was true for this far, and now I want it to be switched. So I want is growing to be now set to false, right? So this is gonna be false now, and else if, and here we have to cover another extreme, else if, and here what would be the other extreme, because we wanted to grow the size of the square for as long until it reaches half the size of the window. So this is covered in here, and then we switching the is growing to false, so it's not going to grow anymore. But then when do we want to stop from like the other side? I'm just gonna paste it here. It's got size smaller or equal to 0. So basically this is the other condition. So if the size of our square is reaching its minimum, then we again want to set is growing to true. So we want it to grow. Again, this is something to work out in your head, because for instance, this is a very simple task. Even if you work as a developer, but you really need to just sit down and think about what is happening. When do I want the square to grow, and when do I want it to stop growing, and I actually want to switch to the other value and decrease the size. And it took me a moment, because I really just prefer to work on my own, and I don't like when people are watching me. So I had to kind of I wouldn't be able to do it in front of the camera. I have to sit down without the camera being switched on. So everything has to be switched off. And I'm just in the silence for a couple of minutes. I'm thinking, okay, I want the square to grow until, and then only then I am capable of creating those conditions. So there it is. Let's check how it works, if it works at all, or okay, it does work. So we are going to 0, and from 0 to the half size of the window. So the most important things to take from this project is that maybe I'm gonna switch the order, because normally the logic would suggest that firstly I want to make sure that I know when the condition is true, and then I need to know what to do when it's true and what to do when it's not true. So first of all, I'm facing the condition. The condition is that I want the size of the square to grow as long as it's going to reach the half size of the window. So the size as soon as the size is bigger or equal to window inner width divided by 2, so it's going to reach half, so it's going to reach its maximum size. When it happens, so this condition is true for a fraction of a second, I'm switching the condition to false, but it's not going to pop back and forth, because this is not going to be switching back and forth, because this condition is not going to be immediately true if this is not true. This is no longer true, if you know what I mean. This size is not true, but the flag is set to false. And then only when the size of the square is reaching 0, the condition is true and the flag is going to be switched to the other side. So it's going to take the other value. As I said, it's kind of confusing. I'm trying to do my best here, but it's for the logic to be worked out on its own. So they're kind of like the extreme cases. So one is on one side, so when it reaches its maximum size, then we're setting the is growing to false, but it's not immediately true after that, because it's only true when it's going to reach 0. So it's going to reach its minimum size. And those flags will be twisted automatically then. And this will happen. But it's going to take a second before it reaches 0. And it's going to take a second before it reaches the maximum size. And here, we only say what is supposed to happen when it's true and what is supposed to happen when it's false. And a little refresher for the code. So we will never say equals true because the flag is created to be either true or false. And here, normally this is a working, functioning code, but you more often than not see the opposite value of is growing used. And the same will go for here. So the program has it saved in its memory, whether it's been true or false. It's currently true because it's been set to true from the start. And it's going to turn it to opposite. So it's going to be turned to false. And the same here. This is now false, so it's going to set it to true. And if it's true, it's going to grow. And if it's false, it's going to decrease in size. So as I said, it looks very straightforward on the face of it, but once you get inside those conditions, it's kind of getting a little confusing and a little difficult to explain because this is a simple concept, but everyone needs to work in their own head for it. Cool. I will see you at the next project, which will be just for you to solve all the conditions to work out on your own. As I said, there is a task for you now. I hope you are prepared to create those conditions, and I think this is slightly easier than the previous one. And if you really did the previous one with me with deep thought and actual consideration of those conditions, then you should have no problem solving this one. This is what we are trying to achieve. So we have a rectangle this time, again glued to the web page, and as soon as it's gonna reach half the size, half the height of the browser window, it stops right there, it changes the color, and it goes back shrinking. I've prepared some instructions here. So we have basically you do nothing in HTML or CSS. This is left out, it's out of your control. Everything you're supposed to do is in JS. And here we go in JavaScript. First of all, we need to force that scroll bar. So we need to set the body height to 10,000 pixels. You can do it with the viewport height, and you assign it in the main.js. So use document body style height. You are accessing document, you are accessing body, you are accessing the style object and its height property. The same way we did with other properties for like width and height for our div, you can do exactly the same thing for the document body style. Instead of in the CSS file or index.html inside the style tag, we can do it directly as an inline style, just to practice. Second thing, we have to create a div, and using the create element method and append child method, you attach the div to the body element. Next thing, we have to define the parameters for the rectangle. So it should be 100% wide. It should be glued to the browser window, so the position is set to fixed. Left and top properties set to 0. Background color spelled with camel case, set to green at the start. And height should be taken from the variable size. So we need to create a separate variable for the size. And just bear in mind the string for pixels and concatenation. Right? Step 4. We need to set up the event listener. So we're using the add event listener method. We listen for the scroll, which is the first parameter in our method. We are setting it in the window object, and as the second parameter, we create a function called change height. So there we only gonna pass a reference to our change height method or function, and previously we used an anonymous function, and we specified with those the entire body of the function consisting in there. But this time we only passing the reference to the function that is going to be declared in the global scope. Alright, so it's outside of this add event listener method. It's outside in the global scope. And what is supposed to happen? Task to be performed by the function is that the rectangle, meaning our div, goes to 50% of the browser window height. You can use the window.inner height divided by 2 property. And we only change the height. The width remains the same. This is a rectangle. It's gonna go back and forth on the height, but the width is going from one edge to the other edge, so no interfering with the width. Step 6. After it reaches 50% of the browser window height, our div element starts to get smaller. It shrinks and turns the background color to red. So as long as it grows, it's always green. When it gets smaller, it turns red. Use the conditional and use a variable as a flag. So again, we need to use 2 sets of instructions. One for like implementing what is supposed to happen when it's growing and when it's shrinking, and the other set for when it's supposed to be for when the flag is supposed to be set to true and when it is supposed to be false. And step 7, the final step, when the div height is lower than 7 or equal to 7, I would say, we reverse the action. So that's been mentioned already. This goes back and forth. So it has to reach 50% of the window height. And then once it reaches the 50%, it goes back. When it reaches 0 on the other end, it grows again. So good luck. Spend some time on it. I'm sure you can do it. So I hope you accepted the challenge, and it doesn't matter if it went well. If it went terrific, then amazing. Then be proud of yourself. If you didn't manage the entire thing, then do not be too harsh on yourself. The most important is trying. Always trying. As much as you type, this is going to be paying off in the future. So just listen to me. And right, we should start. I'm gonna place the entire thing inside the script tag rather than creating a separate file, but if you did, then that's even better. And we cannot do anything, we cannot apply any changes to HTML or CSS files. Cool. First step, the body should be 10,000 pixels high. How do we do it? We do a document body, we get inside the style property, inside the height property, and set it to 10,000 pixels. This should add a nice scroll bar to our beautiful empty web page. Is there a scroll bar? Yes, there is. And we can scroll through nothing because we have nothing on our web page just yet. Point or step number 2, we create a div. Let's do it. I'm gonna declare const div and document create element method here, very useful. Inside the parentheses, inside the quotation marks, we specify the element. Again, we've created a div, but we still need to place it somewhere. So we're gonna do a document inside the body. We're gonna do append child method, which is gonna add our div element to the body. So here we are using our div const, and it should already be placed somewhere here on the web page, even though we cannot see, but we can always inspect. Inspect the page, go to element, and here inside the body we have our script tag and our newly created div. It's right there. Cool. And what was the next thing? I think my instructions are great. And we created an element, we did append child, we defined the parameters of the rectangle. It should be 100% wide. Okay. We are gonna work on a div. We're gonna get inside the style property, we're gonna get inside the width property and set it to 100% as we were asked to do. Let's save it and let's copy this a few times over. The order is not really important, and at this point I will explain that this is definitely not the right way to introduce styles for our elements, but we do it for the practice. So that is going to be so very natural for you if you needed to quickly implement a style, or you needed to be to have an inline style, or if, like for instance, we need to work later on with height property. It is not in the CSS, but it's in here, and it's just gonna be so super simple for you to just know it, that you need to get inside that style property, and then you can access any property that you want to like modify or change. And normally, please use CSS for this. Okay, so the next thing, we need to glue the element to the browser window. So we need to set the position to fixed. Position fixed. No need for percent here. If we use a position fixed, we need to also set left and top. We normally, if there is no position fixed, there is no need for left and top, but we use fixed, so that's not what I wanted at all. Top. And set it to 0. We could do 0 pixels. We could do just 0 or 0 as a number, and it's still going to be interpreted correctly. So let's stick with the number because it's the shortest. Background color to green. So we start with the background color of green. Again, camel case and green color. Save it. Height should be taken from the variable size, and it should be size plus pixels. Oh, here, height. And we still don't have our variable size, but we are going to have one in just a second. Now just filling out the instructions. Cool. Do we need anything else? Not for the properties. So we're going to remove this one because we don't need it. And at the top here, we're going to create our let size. We need to use a let keyword because we're going to modify this one. Const is a constant variable which cannot be updated throughout the program. Size, let's set it to, I don't know, what do you suggest? 100? Let's use 100. And we can move on to the next step on our list, which is where is it? Where are you? Set the event listener. And we're gonna listen for a scroll event on the window object. This goes at the very end here. So it's only gonna listen for this event when everything else has been already created. So add event listener, the first parameter we pass scroll, and as a second parameter we were supposed to pass not an anonymous function like we did previously, but a reference to a new method, change height. So also remember, we are not calling the method right away. This is just a reference, which we're going to declare right above. So a const, change height, and with anonymous function here, and inside that function everything that our program is supposed to do, which is to grow by 50% to 50% of the browser window height. We only change the height, we do not interfere with the width, and after reaching 50% of the browser window height, is supposed to shrink and change color. And we're supposed to use a flag, obviously. Cool. So the first thing we are going to do in here is to increase the size. I'm thinking to increase it by 5 pixels. And at the same time, we are going to update every single time. We need to update the height. So we're going to paste it in here, save it, and see if it works. So it's growing, but it never stops because we don't have that condition for it. So we are going to create a condition. And before we do that, we were supposed to use a flag. So we are going to create one. Let flag is growing. And let's set it to true at first. It's good to always declare those kind of variables at the top and the window event listener at the very bottom. Okay, we're supposed to create our condition. So if is growing is true. We know we don't have to actually say it's true because the purpose of that flag is to be either true or false. So it's always going to be true if it's set to true at the beginning. So if it's growing, then, and I'm just going to move the body of the function inside that condition. Here, save it. So if the flag is set to true, then the size should grow. And we're going to create another condition for else. Only other option here is for the flag to be set to false. So we don't have to again write is not growing or is growing set to false or negate is growing, so use the negation mark, but we can just say else and say straight away what is supposed to happen, and the same thing that is here is supposed to happen on here, but decrement instead of incrementing. Cool. As you can see, this line 30 and 33 is is exactly the same line, so it's like us doubling the code. So instead of placing it twice in the condition, we're going to place it inside the function, which still has to be rendered every time the scroll occurs, but we don't need to type it twice. It's shorter, hence better. And that's how we're gonna leave it for now. So now the only thing that we have to do is to create the conditions for the flag, and it's the only thing that we have to do, but it's very important because without the flag, without the conditions for the flag, the program will never know when to stop and when to go back. Right, so another if statement, and we want to specify that if the size is bigger, right, bigger than the window inner height property divided by 2, because it's half of the height of the window. So if the size of our rectangle is bigger, then we want our is growing flag to switch to false, right? We want it to stop growing. Else, and it's not just else, because we don't want the opposite to happen in any other circumstances, but in a very specific circumstances, meaning that if the size is smaller or equal to 0, then we want the is growing to go back to true. So when it's 0 again, we want it to grow again. Save it. What did I do wrong? Of course, I missed if here, else if. And now let's check how this is working. So it's reaching half, reaching 0, going back and forth. That's beautiful. We know that there is a better way of expressing is growing rather than setting to false. So gonna do this, and I'm gonna just comment this out in case you want to see clearly if you still are not ready for the negation. Is growing. This basically takes the value from here and sets the same thing to the opposite to what it was before. So if it's true now, if we add this negation here, it's going to turn it to false. So always the opposite value. And we're going to do exactly the same thing here, negating or turning around the value, switching the value. Cool. This is probably easier on the eyes because you can see that, okay, this is false and this is true, but it's good to get used to this because you're gonna get a lot of this kind of code at work, or if you go to the Stack Overflow, this is kind of like commonplace. Cool, so we're gonna save it, check if it still works the same, and it does, so the program knows. And the last thing we needed to do was to change the color. So when it's growing, it's supposed to be green, as said at the beginning. And if it's not growing, meaning if it's shrinking, then we need the background color to switch to red. I think this is the best place to place it. We could create another if statement, what for, if we have one here, and go back to green when it is growing. Saving it, and let's see how this works. So when it is growing to the half size of the web page, it's green, then it hits the bar of the half size of the height, and when it's shrinking, it's red. Cool. Again, if you didn't manage the whole thing before on your own, try to come back in the near future and attempt again. Go, and I'll see you at the next project.